Origin just one Suji reaction. This is Korea, Admiral Yi, Martial Lord of Loyalty, Extra History Part 5 by the channel Extra Credits. Yeah, I think this is the last part of this series. This has been an awesome series so far. I've not watched any other history, story and video of anything that is this emotional so far. And this is so Hollywood movie type thing that is just awesome. It always pisses me off whenever Korean government, basically screws Yi over time and time again, every time. Even when he saves their asses, time and time again, like I said. At first I understand it, but, at first he saved their asses, second time they saved their asses, third time, oh look at that, he's the only person who's saving Korea from Japanese, while the king and everybody is basically all the way to China by now. Because Japanese have, run them out of their own country almost. And still he gets demoted because of court political bullshit. So that kind of pissed me off. And I also said that if there were anyone instead of Yi, they would have basically taken the country for themselves. I'm not saying that's my vision. I'm just saying that's what would have happened if there was somebody else in his place, because he was the only one who was kicking Japanese ass with his whatever small fleet he had, while entire Korean army was getting their ass kicked. So clearly he was in powerful position. He had his own island where he was growing food and everything, and he was self-sustaining his own army. So he could have easily created his own guerrilla army and take over the country if he wanted. That's what I was saying. But clearly that's not the way to go. I mean, even though it doesn't matter how much your government is incompetent, just bringing instability like that by taking over thing is not good. It never ends well. So yeah. I hope in this, Yi beats Japanese army, and then I guess, gets, celebrated all over the country. He gets the respect he deserves, but we'll see. Remember, people, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like, subscribe, check out the break site, there's a link in the description, check out the cast of the players like History, Internet Historian, Orisa Gashi Production, CGB Gray, Tier Zoo, and yeah, let's watch this one.
When we left off, Yi had crushed the Japanese at the Battle of Myeongyang and was busy rebuilding the Korean Navy after their disastrous losses while he was being falsely accused. Now, just as he's beginning to coordinate with the Chinese Navy on how to prosecute the war, something major happens. Maybe the one event that can truly change the course of this war. Hideyoshi dies. 6 years and 4 months after the fateful Japanese landing on Korea, the man who started it all, the man who envisioned a vast Asian empire radiating out from Japan, died. This was a sea change. Hideyoshi had been holding the Japanese in Korea by sheer force of will. As soon as he died, the council of men who ran Japan in his stead all looked at one another and said, "Does anyone here actually want to keep fighting Korea? Okay, show of hands, who wants to stay in Korea? Nobody? All right then." With that, they agreed to pull the Japanese forces out of there as soon as they could negotiate.
That's what happened when there is one guy who visions something and is so powerful that he brings this entire country on his back and try to do something, and then he dies and everything just changes after that.
A deal which would let them withdraw their forces safely. But the Koreans were not so eager for peace after seeing hundreds of thousands of their countrymen slaughtered during Hideyoshi's invasion. So Admiral Yi continued to coordinate with the Chinese forces to bottle up the Japanese in one of their last strongholds, the port of Tsungchen. The Chinese army closed around the city on land, and the Korean and Chinese navies blockaded the port.
Yeah, it's not just about revenge right now, especially for the Chinese. It's about sending the message now. So in the future, nobody rises up as Japan's emperor or whatever and says the same shit like, okay, screw it, let's attack Korea again. This time we're going to take Korea and we're going to take China or something. So they have to send message like, next time you try this, there's going to be a bloodbath or something like that. So they have to make this battle really bloody. They have to send a message like, see that, this ended really bad for you, don't try it again.
Seeing the situation as hopeless, the Japanese commander decided the best option he had left was to try to bribe everybody. But each time it seemed as though he was succeeding in bribing the Chinese contingents, Yi shamed them into falling back in line. Seeing no hope of peaceful retreat, the Japanese commander had one last plan. He dispatched a messenger boat to slip through the Chinese lines and tell the other major Japanese garrison to deploy all their ships and rendezvous with him as they tried to break their way through the Chinese and Korean blockade. But Yi got word of this plan and knew that he must prepare. The next night, November 15th, 1598, long after the sun...
See, there's also the thing, when you're at your last leg, you're about to get, I guess, destroyed by your enemy, and you're really desperate. At that moment, there are lots of people who become traitor. Because I'm pretty sure someone in that Japanese army basically leaked it to the Yi, hoping that they would spare him and he could just walk away. Because lots of people at the time, Japanese people who's at that port, is thinking like we all gonna get killed. Because this is literally, last measures right now. They are not agreeing on any treaties. They are not, trying to be peaceful right now. They're trying to make an example out of us. We are all going to die or something like that. So there are going to be lots of traitor at this point. So of course they're going to just go to Yi and, spill the plan so Yi would let them go.
The sun had fallen below the horizon, and the water had faded from blue to deep black. Yi told his forces to slip away from the blockade. They would try to intercept the reinforcing fleet in the fateful Noryang Strait. Near 2 a.m., the joint Korean and Chinese fleet fell upon the resting Japanese ships. At first it was chaos, cannon lighting up the water at night, but soon the Japanese tried to regroup. Despite being caught off guard, they still had 500 ships to the combined 150 of Yi and the Chinese. And moreover, they were fueled by desperation. If they lost here, who knows if they'd ever see Japan again? But the Allied forces had two advantages going for them as well. For one, they had once again caught the Japanese in a strait where they could not easily maneuver their massive fleet, and two, even if they could maneuver, many of their ships were transports, which were only useful for boarding and arquebus fire in a fight. In desperation, the Japanese attacked, driving their ships through the withering hail of the enemy cannonade. Unfortunately for Yi, the Chinese commander, who wasn't used to fighting the Japanese and had no experience with Yi's long-range form of naval warfare, charged forward to meet the Japanese fleet and prepared to engage them in hand-to-hand combat. The Chinese commander was surrounded. Dozens of Japanese ships descended on the Chinese flagship. Yi ordered his own ship to attempt a rescue. Yi's flagship plunged into the midst of the enemy. He was committed now. It would be fierce, close combat the rest of the way. Exactly the type of fight Yi had always tried to avoid. The vessels were so close that unarmed Korean sailors began throwing bundles of burning sticks down on the enemy decks. As Yi's ship broke through the waves, he spotted 3 of the enemy's admirals standing on the deck of one of the Japanese ships attacking his ally. And so, Yi drew his bow and loosed. One of the admirals fell. For a moment there was almost a silence in the midst of the fighting, as everybody looked to see where that arrow had come from. Then one of the Japanese admirals roused himself from his shock and shouted that it was Yi. All the ships must attack Yi. All the Japanese vessels turned and began to give chase to Yi's flagship. But now it was the Chinese admiral's turn to take action, and his ships tore into the vessels pursuing Yi. Soon the fight was on the deck of the Chinese flagship.
Yeah, it never ends well if you just, zigzag from place to place like that. First attack them, then, take a 180 and attack them. Doing that will leave you, your flank will be exposed. First it was Yi who was attacking them in their flank. Now they turned around. Now Chinese is going to attack them. Only person I can think of in the past history who was successful doing that was Napoleon, I guess, going back and forth.
Ship. Chinese Dao sparking against Japanese katana. In the end, the Japanese boarding parties were repelled, but many from both sides lay dead on the deck. As dawn began to bring light back to the scene, everyone could see how badly the Japanese were faring. They attempted to flee, but Yi would have none of it. These people who had come to his land, who had despoiled his home, who had slaughtered his people and endangered his nation, no, he would not let them flee. He grabbed the mallet from the ship's drummer and began to beat the war drum himself, urging his ships to go ever faster. The haunting echo of the drum pushed the fleet on. Its beat hounded the Japanese, bit at their heels. His fleet moved like it never had before, the drum steadily beating like the call of the god of war. They were upon the Japanese. Cannons roared, arquebuses answered. Shouts and screams were heard as ship after ship was caught by the pursuing fleet, possessed by the beat of the drums of war. But then, just for an instant, the drums faltered. Seen by no one but his son, his nephew, and a loyal servant, Yi had been struck by a stray arquebus ball.
Whoa.
They rushed to his side as he slumped against the drum, trying to aid him, asking if there was anything they could do. With his last breath, he said to them, "We are about to win this war. Keep beating the drum. Do not let anyone know of my death." His son picked up the mallet.
Man, I thought... I really hope for him to, survive this and in the end actually get the praise that it deserves in the end at least. What the fuck. Can't believe, I watched this series. What is this fifth part now? I didn't even know who Admiral Yi was before I started to react to this. And just, in this fifth part, I'm really feeling sad for, somebody who died a long time ago by now. But this is just effed up, man.
And continued the beat. Dressed in Yi's armor, his son and his nephew took up the command. For hours, they were Yi, commanding as he would, with all his ability and skill. None of Yi's officers ever realized he had fallen until, as the battle was closing, the Chinese flagship was once again surrounded. Yi's son ordered his ship into the thick. They darted forward, breaking the cordon around the Chinese flagship, helping the Chinese to escape. The fighting was fierce, but it was near the last of it. And as the day closed, the Chinese admiral sailed toward Yi's flagship and called out to thank Yi for saving him, to invite Yi to celebrate the glorious day together. But he was met by Yi's son. Instantly, he knew what had happened, and 3 times he threw himself to the deck, wailing and crying out, "Even after death, you saved my life."
Look at that shit, man. How awesome this guy was, Admiral Yi, that these Chinese forces that joined him at the end of this entire battle, entire war. They just joined, I guess, just recently in the last part, Chinese forces just joined him. And whatever Yi did was enough for him to, even the Chinese admiral is crying over his death. How much of a badass can a person be? And, Yi's sons are kind of like him too, right? Because even in the end, they were acting like Yi. They were maneuvering like Yi, and they were actually effective like that.
Life. This was the last battle of the war. 300 Japanese ships were destroyed or captured. After this, the remaining Japanese garrisons would either be captured one by the Chinese and Korean forces, or slip back to Japan to fight one last struggle before Tokugawa's ascension as shogun. At last, the Imjin War was at an end. Hideyoshi's dream of a Japanese empire was broken. Korea was free. But Yi would never see it. Thousands turned out to see his body returned to his small home village. People lined the road and wailed at the passing of a man they may never have met. The Chinese admiral wrote for him a eulogy, and even the court and the king tried to make their recompense.
Really?
And so passed the man so ill-treated in life, so
Seriously.
often demoted and accused, the man who would forever be known as the martial lord of loyalty.
This is the kind of story where everybody just think as a consolation prize. At least after he died, he was respected. But, he's dead, man. He can't know none of that shit. When he lived, he was treated really badly. Especially where he was single-handedly saving the entire country over and over again. Imagine without Yi. Korea would have been lost a long time ago. Korean king and all the court would have been in the Chinese territory, seeking refuge. Chinese would have been saying like, okay, yeah, Korea's lost. Maybe we will, mount an offense one day, but right now it's lost. You can stay here as our guest or something. Korea would have been lost easily, all the people slaughtered. Yi really cared about the Korean people. There were instances where he actually thought through, like if we destroy the ships at the harbor or wherever they were, the Japanese people will slaughter the civilians, so I'm not going to do that. He actually fought for the people rather than for glory. This is just effed up, man. Seriously, I'm constantly saying this. Somebody has to make a Hollywood major movie about this, because even in the end, he was beating the drum. I guess now I understand why in the previous parts where everybody was just commenting beat the drum because of this scenario. That was so epic, just beating the drum at the last leg, creating this kind of psychological warfare over Japanese. Damn, this was awesome. Alright people, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like, subscribe, check out the Week Sunday, there's a link in the description, check out the cast playlist, check out the end cards, and comment down which next extra credit series you want me to react, and I'll see you next time.